Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we are going to talk about more dev info. Riot Rubin did a stream and talked about things again, and so I thought some of them were quite interesting, and we dive in to them. Because, you might want to know, like I did. And so, yeah, we're going to go through, analyze this. Of course, there will be the patch notes today. So, of course, I will be making a video about that as well. So, 2 videos today. Don't miss that one. It should be out within about the hour of the patch notes releasing. Could be out now whilst you're watching this. So, just make sure you stay in touch with me and, watch that video as well. Because I'm sure it'll be very interesting. So, with that said, yeah, this first part is, just kind of praising the devs for doing streams, talking about things like that. I think that, this to me is really, really interesting, and I, might disagree with some of it, but of course I would never actually flame the devs for doing it. I think that, this should only be praised because I want more of the devs speaking about the game so that I can have a better idea of what's going to happen. So with that said, let's move in and talk about what was said. So this first one I don't really need to talk about too much, but this is the thing. I will leave a link in the description with this Reddit post up there, so if you do want to read the whole thing, you absolutely can, okay? So go down there, but I'm just going to go over the parts that I think were interesting. So first thing we're going to talk about is Nocturne's early designs. One of the first designs of Nocturne was that when you were attacking, you could not see the enemy unit until blocking the enemy. That was closer to his League of Legends counterpart. He doesn't remember if they ever tried or tested it, but in the end, it was not implemented because it generated a lot of problems. Quite interesting, of course. These kind of things, you do see in custom LOR quite a bit, and I think similarly to this one as well, champions that don't exist today. In the alpha of the game, they developed champions that are not there today. In the other stream, he mentioned Blitzcrank, and in this one, he mentioned Wukong. Now, this was, to me, very interesting. I just never thought, I'd never occurred to me that they would have designed champions, and then just sort of gone, that doesn't work. Let's leave it. That to me is like super, super interesting, and I never even knew that. I know that with Lysandra that they said, Lysandra was meant to come out when Trundle came out, but instead they decided that Lysandra worked better, later on. Coming out with like Talia and that kind of thing. So instead they kind of swapped that around. I know that they've mentioned that before, which I thought was quite interesting as well. So, we know that they have this ability to be like, let's swap this around. Let's, do this one instead, throw that one out. I think it's quite interesting. And I never knew that they had designed these other champions and then just kind of gone, yeah, I'll leave that to the wayside. Anyway, Wukong was a 3-mana 3/3 with stats that created a clone of itself when attacking. Until it hit or took damage, the enemy did not know which was the real one. The clone could not inflict damage. He mentioned that it was fun to play with, but not against him, I can imagine. He commented that his mechanics were very complicated to maintain at the code level, and possibly every card set release would be full of bugs. So again, this is the kind of thing that I've seen multiple times on custom LOR, particularly with Fiddlesticks, I think, this kind of idea. So it kind of hints that this kind of thing, probably isn't coming into the game, but still, a very interesting kind of take. And, also, like, this is the kind of thing that, like, a champion being interesting at, like, the code level and being too complex, to code, like, properly and not have bugs. Obviously, it's something that we would never think about, but, the devs always do have to think about, particularly these kind of things. So, Freljord is a weak region. He already commented on this, but emphasized it this time. He comments that it's a region that has many powerful cards, and even one of the best cards in the game, according to him, Blight Ravine. Blight Ravine's a very strong card, but the rest of the cards are not at the same level. He mentions that the ramp mechanic was nerfed and implies that it affected the rest of the high cost cards in the region. So obviously he's probably talking about like War Mother's Call, Feel the Rush. You could even say just like Anivia as well. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. And, I did say in my buff video yesterday that Wording Stones, I think, could be a potential candidate for a buff, and it looks like, and this was before I saw this post, I made that video, so, but it looks like I was on the right tracks because, mentioned there by a dev, obviously that doesn't mean it will be, but potential. And he comments that cards traditionally very played in the region like Sentry or Omen Hawk have been affected with the power increase of the game by Bandle City because it has tools to do 1 point of damage, and even after reversing cards like Make It Rain. So yes, anything with 1 health, got a lot worse with Bandle City. Because there was just a lot of 1 damage things, good 1 damage things all of a sudden. And so, anything with 1 health, we all thought that like the 2/1 Kelp Maidens, is it called, and the Sting Officer, the Caitlyn 2/1 elusive, like we all thought that they were going to be good cards because traditionally a 2/1 elusive, with an ability, that's been a pretty good card. That would be a good card most of the time, but because there's just so many 1 damage stuff, they all became unplayable. And instead, the 2 mana 1/2 Bandle City elusive was actually the good card because that could survive the ping, which is quite interesting. He insists that people don't take his words too seriously. He just gives his opinion, and from his point of view, Freljord cards are weak. I don't think many people would disagree with that, to be honest. I think most people are probably expecting some kind of Freljord buff. Card rotation. This one is probably like the big one, right? Because, this is kind of a big idea. And I've made a video previously about card rotation and why I think it should be in the game. And he thinks that eventually there will be a rotation of cards. The idea would be to replace cards from old expansions with other cards. That's what rotation is. These replaced cards would be cards that have not seen much play or cards that have had a presence in the metagame for a long time. He clarifies that this does not mean that they will stop improving existing champions in balance patches. Now, we don't know if this means champions as well, right? This could just mean follows. It could just mean spells and followers. It absolutely could. It could also mean champions. We don't know, right? That's the important part. So, when will rotation of cards happen? I have absolutely no idea. To be honest, it might start pretty soon. They might say, at the start of sort of the next set, now that they've got all the regions into the game, maybe they decide that that's the right time to start rotation. We don't know. But this kind of rotation, where you just pick and choose the cards that get rotated, that's never, I don't know of a game that's done that before. Normally, just a set rotates. Like, for instance, Foundations or Rising Tides would just be out of the game all of a sudden. Obviously, that would mean sort of removing a large portion of a region in Runeterra's case, so maybe that's why, they kind of can't do that. And so, yeah, maybe we'll just get selected cards, which would be interesting to see which cards they decide to rotate. We'll see, I guess. It would be quite interesting. Moving on to adding League of Legends lore characters to the game. So this one, not as interesting to me, but I'm sure to some of you it probably is. Basically, they take the time to introduce new stories with each new card release. Catagrin is the Infernal Dragon of League of Legends. This is what we found out this week, which is, interesting for those of you. Clarifies, even though the blue buff exists, it does not mean they will include all the dragons, the national, etc. Basically, they add in things from League of Legends. Shock horror. That's what they do. Streaming summary controversy. So, he believes there was a controversy due to the lack of context in his words. He clarifies that he thinks that balance is very important in the game and mentions that last year when he was a balance leader, we saw everything he did regarding it. So what he's talking about here is basically the video that I made a couple days ago about his other stream. He thought that was summarized a bit too much. He got some heat for it when he shouldn't have, because, basically people were just reading a truncated sentence, and he thinks that was unfair, which is probably fair enough. And he's talking about, when he was doing balance, the game was probably in its best state. So let's be fair to Rubin, that is true. They release 1 patch every month, an expansion every 2 months, and then release small patches in between. They think that releasing 1 big patch every 2 months is the minimum you need to be a game as a service card game, since they have seasonal tournaments every 2 months. Clarifies this because of the controversy generated last week. This, I think, is really interesting, because I think we can all probably agree with this. And the fact that he said the minimum, this is what we ask for, right? Expansion every 2 months, big patch in between. I think most people would be happy. If something is really wrong, maybe you have to change things. If you get a Naziralia, sure, make some nerfs, outside of that big patch in the middle of the month, right? And that's all we need, really. But unfortunately, we just haven't seen that as much lately. And I think that has been a bit of a problem. Meta Worlds. He clarifies that in his opinion as a player, not as a dev, he comments that he was surprised about the quality of the game at Worlds. There were tons of meaningful decisions and the best player won. He comments that there was exciting moments, even when the flash bomb traps, but in particular, he believes that it's an example of what healthy RNG can be. So yes, this is good to see that, the devs took a risk, because you don't normally get balance patches, particularly, hotfix patches right before a big tournament. That's not normally what a dev team would do, for fear of, making a mistake. But they did do it. They were bold. They went for it. And it worked out about as well as you could expect. Because instead of just seeing like Sivir Akshan in every game, we got a ton of variety at Worlds. And it was probably the best Runeterra tournament I've seen. And yeah, it was, healthy RNG. It was healthy RNG. Flash bombs, I think the traps are pretty healthy RNG as a whole. And yeah, I think most of the RNG in Runeterra is pretty healthy, to be honest. So I don't have a problem with it. I think this is good that the devs think that because, I personally don't mind seeing, more patches before big tournaments and things like that. The Lost Soul problem. Now, this is interesting. He comments that it cannot exist in its current form because its design invalidates many strategies and champions in the game. He thinks it's a very interesting card with a good design, and it's a good tool for discard decks. It cannot exist in its current form. This is very, very heartwarming to me that they recognize that this is a big, big problem. And when that card was first released, I think a lot of people, myself included, didn't think it was going to be that good. But, as time went on, we kind of slowly realized, like, wow, this thing is a monster. This thing changes the game. It changes the way the game is played, essentially, because it's just infinite. It is just infinite. Essentially, if the game went on and on and on and on and on, the person with Lost Soul was probably going to win. And when you get a Lost Soul versus Lost Soul matchup, and both of you are just like, just playing constant Lost Souls or Twin Blade Revenants, and that's kind of the only card you're playing, you just end up in a big kind of stalemate for a very long time. And that's kind of what is happening. But very intrigued to see what they do with Lost Soul. It could be, something pretty big, like adding Can't Block or something onto Twin Blade Revenant. I think that's probably like the level, and I've said this before, that, this card, really needs to change. Like, it really needs to change. Like, a simple, like, small nerf isn't enough, in my opinion. Because, like, and I'm glad to see that Rubin agrees, that just kind of the fundamental design of the card is unhealthy. And unless you nerf the numbers by a lot, it's just not going to be a good state for the game to be in. And finally, we have Minimorph. Fast spell or mini minity be a 5/5. He said he wanted to discuss this on Progress Day, but he didn't have time to do so. Makes a comparison with a Whimsy to explain the importance of speed of spells. When they designed Whimsy as a burst type spell, it's so players can react and cast spells like Sharp Sight to protect the unit, but he admits that this thinking might be wrong with Minimorph since you don't want to protect the mini minity. This is the important part, right? That with Minimorph, the card is silenced forever. With Whimsy, it's just for that turn. So if you keep the unit alive, the little squirrel, you get back your unit, and that's what's important. Whereas, obviously, with Minimorph, that doesn't really work because, of course, why would you want to keep this random 3/3 that's just a plain 3/3 alive, right? It doesn't make any sense. He also comments they made it fast. There would be situations where the spell speed could be beneficial to your opponents. Since if, for example, you have 5 health and cast it on the enemy, you would nullify any buffs the enemy cast by the enemy, like Sharp Sight. That is true that you couldn't really pre-commit. I don't think that is as big of a problem because generally pre-committing is very risky in Runeterra anyway, especially if they have at least 6 mana available. So whilst that is true, I don't think that would be as big of a problem because if your opponent has 6 mana up, why are you pre-committing like a bunch of buffs onto your card, right? So yeah, that's basically my point. Someone in chat told him making Minity a 5/5 could solve the problem. He couldn't tell you if that would solve the fundamental problem with the card, which is frustration when it's played on you. Yeah, that's the big thing, right? That making your Minity a 5/5, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter because the problem with this card is that it is too good against very, very specific things. And it's somewhat useless against other things. And anytime you get one of those cards, in my opinion, it's the same reason why Equinox is not a good card for the game to have. Because Equinox hard counters very specific things and is pretty useless against a lot of other things. That to me is not a good card to have, to be honest. That's just not a good card to have in the game, in my opinion. And so, what will they do with it? I think they probably will make it fast speed. Like, it's one of those cards, it's kind of, I made a comparison to Unyielding Spirit. When I did a video called Let's Talk About Minimorph, and I made a comparison to Unyielding Spirit, that it's not about the power level of the card, it's just about the card and what it does and how it's frustrating and how it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you make it a worse card, it's still going to be frustrating anytime it gets played against you. You know, because if your Scion gets turned into a 5/5, either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You still feel like, wow, well done, you had one card that won you the game. You know, I have my strategy, you had the one card that just counters my strategy. What am I meant to do? That's the fundamental problem. Changing the strength of the card doesn't matter that much. It's a psychological thing. Changing it to fast speed will help that psychological problem. I honestly wouldn't mind if they did both of these and just said, this card is not meant to be good anymore. This card is now like a limited only card. You know, if you want like your kind of hard removal in Vandal City, then Minimorph is your option, right? If you don't, then leave it alone. That's what I would do personally. That's just my opinion. Because why do we want these toxic cards in the game? You know, the game can be... Vengeance isn't a toxic card. It's fine. I'm happy with it. Keep Vengeance alive, you know? Fine. But why must we endure with people defending toxic cards? I don't get it. Anyway, that's all we have for today. As I say, tomorrow there will be a video talking about... today, there will be obviously the patch notes video. Then, depending on what happens on the patch notes, obviously, tomorrow there'll be videos about playing whatever changed. You know, maybe Braum gets booked, and I'll play that. Anyway, with that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a really nice day.